Okay, so we are recording. This will be the lecture about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You should have just barely finished watching the one about your oral history assignment, and again, email me if you have any questions. Now, for the sub, you should have now close out this video so that you're not looking at me, and you have up the PowerPoint presentation, and it's labeled Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and it's a picture with a painting of him, and just have that slide going, and whenever I say click next slide, move on to the next slide. So with that, folks, do try and take notes as best you can on what we're talking about. Anything that stands out to you, go ahead and add. The slide does not have any words on it. It is only pictures from here on out. So we're going to be talking about the background of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. As kind of an introduction to this, we've been learning about Herbert Hoover and how he had an extraordinary background that prepared him to become president of the United States. The opposite is really interesting with Franklin Roosevelt. If you were to look at his childhood, you're like, this guy is in no way prepared to lead us out of a Great Depression. You will, at the end of this, be given a reading, and for those in 5th period, where this is today a really long day, I'd recommend you do the Herbert Hoover reading and the FDR reading, and then just go ahead and do your post. For those of you in 5th period, this should take up the remaining of time. Just make sure that you get the the reading on the New Deal, so that you can do your post. So for this post, you're going to need to do the Hoover reading and the FDR reading on the New Deal, and then kind of make your decision based off of those things. So with that, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, if we were to add a 5th member to Mount Rushmore, it would certainly be this man. He is considered, in many cases, an icon in American history. My grandparents on both sides, and recognize one of my grandparents, they were fairly liberal Democrats. They adored Franklin Roosevelt, and they had a picture of him in their home. My other grandparents, fairly conservative Republican, they also had a picture of Franklin Roosevelt in their home. And so if we were to add one word to what Franklin Roosevelt is, he instilled trust and hope in the nation. Okay, and whenever people say one of our presidents is not acting very presidential, the standard that they are holding them up to is Franklin Roosevelt. So a lot of people, when they say, well, President Trump or President Obama, they don't seem presidential. That's under the umbrella of Franklin Roosevelt. So with that, let's learn about why this man was so trusted and what makes him one of kind of our iconic presidents. He is on our dime, if you're wondering if he's on any of our money. So next slide. As a child, Franklin Roosevelt was born to an extremely wealthy family. His family were the Roosevelts, and as we learned about with Teddy Roosevelt, the Roosevelts were kind of the, if we had a monarchical family, it would be the Roosevelts. They came over in the 1600s from Denmark. They established Lower Manhattan, and the Roosevelt family broke off, and there were lots of them. Teddy and Franklin are 5th cousins, and that's actually not very close, but they do have the same name. And as a child, he was very coddled. The thing that you need to know about him is he is an only child. His mother raised him and coddled him whenever anything was hard for Franklin. He was just anything he needed. Now, his father, uniquely, when Franklin was born, his father was nearly 70 years old. Next slide. So here's a picture of Franklin and his father, James Roosevelt. James was very rich, made all of his millions, and when he was 60, he was like, there's something about my life that is not complete. So he met Franklin's mother, and they got married, and a few years later, Franklin was born, and this is a picture with Franklin and his father. Now, his father never really had a father growing up. His dad died when he was 16 years old, of old age, and his dad was just too weak really for him to have kind of what you would consider to be a normal father-son relationship. Instead, Franklin was, and here's a picture of Franklin as a teenager right before his father died with his mother. His mother was 35 years younger than, so this is next slide. You should be seeing the family posing together with Franklin in the background. If you could say that one most important person in Franklin's life throughout his whole life is his mother. Next slide. Here's a picture of Franklin as a baby, and if you're wondering why is he wearing a dress, diapers were not very prevalent. In fact, they weren't really invented yet, and babies poop and pee a lot. Poop. And whenever they poop, they always, if you don't have a diaper, you mess up your pants. And so most kids, until they were potty trained, they just wore a dress because it was easy. So if you ever see your grandparents or great-grandparents and they're wearing a dress, that's why. So this is Franklin as a baby. This is Franklin with his mom as a young child. And then Franklin as president with Mama Roosevelt. Okay, so this kid, he's very, very rich. He's very, very spoiled. He is a mama's boy. Anytime anything got hard, all he did was just run to his mommy. So he then, as a child, he was actually very much teased because his dad is super old. His mom coddles him, and he was just anytime anything got hard, he was taken care of. And you can look at pictures of Franklin, next slide, and you can see him. Here's him sailing. Here's him when he was a teenager going to the highest, best prep school that New York City had to offer. And if you look at every single picture we've seen of him thus far, he has kind of this somber look because he's just an average student. Not that his growth really was kind of stifled by his mother. There's nothing unique about this kid at all. Until the age of 18, for the first time in his life, he's able to go off to college, and he's going to go to Harvard. And the reason he goes to Harvard is he wants to live up to the Roosevelt name, and the year is 1900. Okay, that's when he enters Harvard. And in 1900, who's vice president of the United States? It's his fifth cousin, Teddy Roosevelt. And so Franklin, who never really had a father figure, is going to look up to Teddy to be kind of an inspiration to him. And because Teddy went to Harvard, that is where Franklin's going to go. And he's going to try to join all the clubs that Teddy did and try to have that same energy and popularity, but he just never really fits in. He goes out for the football team, but the football team, like right off the bat, he realizes this is hard and mommy's not going to protect me. And so he instead, you can see here, there's an odd picture, he becomes a male cheerleader. And I have a picture here. We've had two presidents that were actually male cheerleaders. Franklin Roosevelt was one, and I couldn't find a picture of him, but this is the other person that was the other head cheerleader. Do any of you recognize him? He went to Yale University. That is George W. Bush, okay? And so Franklin, he always said that college, he enjoyed college life. He wanted to be more popular, but he really wasn't. But he said every Saturday during the football games, he would stand on the football field, and this is a quote from him. He would say, and I felt like a damn fool every day of college. And some of you know, when I was in high school, I was also a male cheerleader, and I would just echo that sentiment. There was lots of times I stood on the sideline there with my uniform on, looking at the football players, and I would just look around and say, man, I am a damn fool. But that's just kind of one of those kind of golden moments with him. So at college, he's going to study to become a lawyer. And again, there's nothing exceptional about him. He's just this average kid. But he was a Roosevelt, and he was fairly good looking. Well, everything changes in 1901 when President Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, is going to come to Harvard to give the commencement speech. And while they're at Harvard, he's going to call his nephew, Franklin, and says, hey, let's go out to eat. And while they're out to eat, next slide, Teddy is going to say, hey, Franklin, you dating anyone? Franklin's going to say, no, I'm not. And he says, well, I've got this niece, Eleanor, that I think you two would really get along. Now, Eleanor and Franklin, they are fifth cousins. Now, that is not as close as, it's not weird, okay? Yes, they both have the Roosevelt last name, but fifth cousins. In state law, you are allowed to marry your third cousin. So this is quite common. I bet you actually some of you, your parents were fifth cousins. It's not odd, okay? To say that Franklin and Eleanor married cousins, it's not weird, okay? I'm sure a lot of you are thinking about me coming from a small town, and no, I never dated my cousin. I did ask her on a date. I didn't know she was my cousin, but then we realized we were cousins and we never spoke of it again, okay? Although to my credit, she was really hot. In any case, moving on. Franklin and Eleanor, okay? They're going to hit it off. And before we can move on with their relationship, let's talk about Eleanor's background. So next slide. Now, Eleanor, okay? She is my favorite woman in American history to talk about, and she's moving up and becoming potentially my favorite American to talk about. So who is this woman, okay? Eleanor Roosevelt. Love this picture of her. This is taken in the 1920s when her and Franklin were in their probably 10th or 11th year of marriage. So next slide. All right, this is Eleanor. She is the daughter of Elliott Roosevelt. Okay, now Elliott Roosevelt, he's the man sitting there with his three little girls. Eleanor is the oldest there. Elliott is Teddy Roosevelt's youngest brother. He, as a child, had all the potential in the world. We remember Teddy, if you came to that Grizzly Ox, Teddy was viewed as very, very weak. Elliott was viewed as the son with all the potential. However, where Teddy kind of grew and became a bodybuilder and grew in energy and excitement, Elliott instead became a drunk. Now, today's times, he probably would be considered schizophrenic. But during their days, that term didn't exist. He was just labeled Teddy Roosevelt's failure of a drunk brother. And he loved and adored Eleanor. So let's talk about Eleanor. If we look at this picture here of her with the doll, what do you notice? Probably one of you said, that's a funny looking kid. And she was. Eleanor is not attractive. Okay, and it's going to carry with her throughout her whole life. Even as a child, Eleanor's mother was very, very beautiful. Honestly, very judgmental. And even as a baby, as a toddler, Eleanor is called ugly by her mother. That she's not going to result really in anything because she's too ugly. And so Eleanor and her mother never really had a positive relationship. Now, this picture with the family, Eleanor's mother died of she was sick, just a sickly person. She died when Eleanor was 7 years old. She is a Roosevelt, and she is going to be taken care of by Teddy and Elliott's older sister, Mammy. Now, Elliott always promises, and this is such a sad story, Elliott is the dad who will disappear for 2 to 3 months at a time, just go on this bender where he goes off and gets drunk. And then he'll come home and he'll tell the Eleanor, hey, I will be there and we're going to go have like a daddy-daughter date. So Eleanor's so excited, and you can imagine this little 6-year-old girl who all she wants is the attention of her father. And her dad says, okay, I'll be there at 3. So she gets her suitcase, she's all ready, her dad's going to come pick her up. 3, dad's not there. 4, dad's not there. She waits all day at the doorstep, and Elliott never shows up. And so Eleanor, her biggest hero in her life was her father, but her father was an ultimate failure. Now, Eleanor actually doesn't know how many siblings she has. She knows that she has 2 other siblings with her mother, but it is assumed that she also has some half siblings in France, because Elliott's favorite place to go was to go and get drunk in France, and he had some girlfriends there. Is this not recording? Did you die? Okay. I really hope this is working. I assume it is. So he is going to continue. He just has this really sad life. I'm going to pause real fast to make sure this sound is working.